I tried my best to hide the irritation on my face. It is often difficult to maintain a professional, detached demeanor with new patients. This is especially true for people like Catherine. Yes, you heard correctly, Catherine. Like that devastating hurricane that almost wiped New Orleans off the face of the earth. It's ironic that she has a name like that, considering what I was beginning to understand about her. She was definitely a force to be reckoned with, and that's putting it mildly. Catherine is strikingly beautiful, but it was a cold, cruel beauty like that of a mannequin. She wore perfectly fitting, expensive clothes. Her tight pants hugged her hips without being obscenely tight. Her blazer and silk blouse also enhanced her beauty in a classy, sexy way. Even the nail polish on her perfectly manicured hands seemed expensive. However, her demeanor was completely at odds with her graceful, feminine appearance. Her nonverbal communication was arrogant and aggressive. Her eyes looked directly at me as she spoke, as if challenging me. She was sitting in the middle of the sofa, which in itself was unusual. Most people, given a whole sofa at their disposal, choose one of the sides with an armrest. But Catherine sat down on the central pillow as if she took it as her own. With one leg crossed over the other, her hands folded in her lap, and a scornful grin on her face, she sat there, ready to fight. I think men would call her Ice Queen. Others, less tactful, would call her the Queen of Bitches. Often new patients feel tense and nervous. Some people feel that they need their therapist to like them, or at least not think badly of them. Others want some kind of confirmation that they were right in their actions or were innocent victims of what happened to them. This makes them defensive. For people like Catherine, they overcompensate by displaying bravado. However, Catherine was a little different. Her hostility seemed more rooted in inner anger. At the moment, it was directed at her ex-husband. It would be more correct to say that it was redirected. One of the most important things I've learned is that people rarely get angry at what they direct their anger at. It's like a toothache. Sometimes the pain is felt in a tooth that is not damaged. This is called referred pain, and in my practice, anger works the same way. So, Catherine. Call me Cat, Doc. We've already discussed this. Tries to control the flow of the conversation. She insists that I call her by her chosen name, but she calls me Doc instead of Beth or Dr. Carter. She wants me to know that she is in control of the situation. Let him win this round. For now. Sorry, Cat, last week was your first session with me. We learned a lot about each other, but we didn't touch on what brought you here. Since you signed up and came to your second session, I think you want to dig deeper. So why not start with what brought you here? I noticed her foot tapping nervously on the floor, which gave away the controlled image she wanted to convey. However, she pointedly rolled her eyes and groaned as if she was annoyed. I'm here because my ex-husband is a wuss. Vivid language for a Stanford-educated woman. She is reenacting this performance. She tries to take me out of my comfort zone by using extreme language. Okay, Cat, tell me, what do you mean by calling him a wuss? Describe what makes him a wimp. I noticed a moment of surprise on her face. She expected me to replace her harsh language with softer words. Normally, I would do this. I hate harsh language and find it counterproductive to successful therapy. However, I felt that if I did this to her, she would use this tactic as a wall to hide behind when things got tough. I wanted to show her that her antics didn't scare me at all. Well, Doc, Bran was a wuss because when we were married, he had no pride. He didn't fight, she said, trying to up the ante. Her grin made me understand that this was done on purpose. As funny as this is, you still haven't answered the question, I said calmly. My face expressed nothing but professionalism, as if I was completely unmoved by her obvious attempt to divert the conversation. Seeing her silent confession, I emphasized my statement. But I think you know that, Cat. Her body language softened, letting me know she had given in a little. Her arms fell to her sides, and she leaned back against the pillow. She was testing the balance of power in our relationship. After all, she was a lawyer. I expected this from her. My goal was to show her that this was not a power struggle and certainly not a hostile hearing. She did not need to achieve supremacy. I wasn't going to be conquered by her. My job was to help her gain insight into what brought her here. "Why don't you start by telling me what annoyed you about your ex?" I said invitingly. Her face expressed something akin to sadness. She seemed determined not to show any emotion, so it passed quickly. For starters, he never fought for anything. Every argument ended with him just walking out of the room. He didn't even yell back. He told me we're not in court and I don't need to treat him like one. Hostile witness. Then she snorted derisively and said, "He's never seen me cross-examine a hostile witness. If he had, he'd know he got off easy." Her tone was full of anger and sarcasm, but there was something more to it. Regret, sadness, maybe even a little remorse. "What do you think he should have done when you were arguing?" Her face contorted with a mixture of emotions. "I don't know. Fight, scream, something. Show he's a man, for God's sake." "Do you think that real men fight and quarrel when arguing?" She gave me an angry look, and then it turned into a grin. "I see what you're doing, Doc. Now you'll say that Bran was right not to argue. Then you'll probably tell stories about husbands who argue and their wives become victims of domestic violence." She's trying to predict what I'll say in response. This allows her to maintain control. "Actually, Kat, I was going to agree with you, but for different reasons. Arguing isn't what real men do, but it's what all people do when they're passionate about something. They fight for them to protect what is dear to them. People often believe that the ideal relationship is one in which there are no disagreements, no quarrels. In fact, it's the opposite. If there are two people who never argue about anything, can only mean one of three things. One or both people in the relationship are not being completely honest about what's bothering them. They're just agreeing for the sake of peace. Two, one or both people don't care enough about the relationship to waste energy on arguing. One of the people in the relationship is depressed to the point of submission. The look of surprise on her face told me that I had taken her by surprise. She tried to find the answer. I didn't want to turn this into a fight, so I changed course. "Tell me what made you fall in love with Brandon." It took her a few seconds to adjust to the new direction. She looked at the ceiling and pursed her lips as if she was thinking. Without realizing it, she softened her grimace slightly, and her lips almost turned into a smile. "Bran was nice. Kinder than anyone I've ever known. And he was patient with me. He didn't call me bossy like so many other men in my life. He appreciated my assertive nature." "How were you doing with your communication?" She laughed a little, remembering. It was not a sarcastic laugh, as before, but more reminiscent of nostalgia. "Bran had no problem communicating. We could talk about everything for hours." The smile slowly left her face, and her voice faded as she said, "At least in the beginning." "What were you talking about when everything was fine?" I asked, trying to bring her back to happier memories. Perhaps it was a little selfish of me, but I liked seeing her face without a sad expression. "About everything. About movies, people, politics, my work, everything." Even if he didn't know what he was talking about, he could carry on a conversation. She chuckled at this. It was never boring to talk to him. "Why do you think he fell in love with you?" I asked. Too late, I realized it was a mistake. The smirk returned to her face, and her eyes locked onto mine again with challenge. "Because I was so good in bed that he knew he couldn't do better. Plus, I took care of his lazy ass. If it weren't for me, he'd be another poor writer who couldn't feed himself." I silently reproached myself. Unwittingly, I allowed her to hide behind her aggressive, condescending wall. However, I noticed something that might be useful. She tried to dodge the question with sarcasm because she probably couldn't think of an answer to it. I decided to push a little. "So you fell in love with him because of his intelligence, his humor, his kindness, his patience, and the fact that he valued you for who you were. And he only fell in love with you because you were good in bed and paid the bills. Is this how you see your relationship?" I paused to give her time to process this before continuing for shock value. "Looks like you got the best deal in marriage." She looked at me in disbelief and asked, "Where did you get that?" Well, if what you say is true, then you fell in love with a man who was patient with you and loved you for who you are. You could talk to him about things that interested you. And all he got it, this is a mommy with money who was good in bed. This pushed her back. This got her thinking about the real answer. The grin disappeared. I think he might have liked my straightforwardness. He said he liked my brutal honesty because he always knew where he stood. I didn't play word games or try to spare his feelings. I said what I meant. Her face darkened. I also noticed that she hesitated when she said brutal honesty. I focused my attention on this. Have you always been honest with him? She looked at the floor. A very significant moment because I felt that this was the true beginning for us. Yes, I was. Even when it hurt, she said in a voice much softer than usual. When did you hurt him, Kat? I saw the walls begin to crumble. My instincts told me it was too good to be true. Too fast. I was right because Catherine backed down. Instantly, she retreated into her safe zone behind her tough lawyer manner. Who cares? We're already divorced, so there's no point in talking about it. She crossed her arms in protest and glared at me. She was like a small child being forced to apologize to a sibling, even though she believes she is completely justified in an act of teenage violence. Well, obviously it's important to you. If it weren't, you wouldn't be here. I saw signs that she was struggling with the tsunami of emotions that threatened to wash up on her shores. Her eyes watered with uncontrollable tears as she looked away. She avoided all eye contact with me. Why don't you tell me how you hurt Brandon? I said comfortingly, but powerfully. Then I let silence fill the air. Catherine left my question unanswered. She wanted to endure me, to force me to change the subject. But I had an advantage. Even in her silence, I could read body language that spoke louder than she could scream at the top of her lungs. She wanted to tell me these things. She needed it. These accumulated feelings were rushing out. They lurked just below the surface, fighting her need to maintain control in order to break through. I knew that once she realized that this was not a power struggle, she would give in and open up. Okay, good, she finally said. I was honest with him when I slept with another man. I told him about it and then divorced him. Are you happy now? She looked for some kind of reaction on my face, but I gave her nothing. I remained neutral. It was important that she saw that nothing could shock me. This would go a long way towards making her feel comfortable. Describe him, I said dispassionately. Who, Terry? She asked. Of course I meant Terry. She knew it. It was a ploy to stall for time. Yes, I'd like to hear about Terry. What attracted you to him? Catherine took a deep breath and looked at the ceiling again. This time, the smile on her face was more noticeable than when she talked about her husband. Terry was my colleague. He is also a lawyer. She paused, lost in memory. God, this man just owns the courtroom. The judge and opposing counsel were eating out of his hands. He had this confident walk, like he knew that no matter what, he would get his way. He has a commanding presence. I said. It was not a question. I've reworded her words to give them more context. She nodded. Oh yeah, he's the only person who ever scared me. We were both vying for the senior partner spot. I understand. This intimidation that you felt. Did it attract you? Made you fall in love with him? I guess so. It was kind of exciting. No man has ever made me feel that way, including Brandon. She leaned forward and began fiddling with her fingers nervously. Every man I've ever dated has always submitted to me. A few of my ex-boyfriends ate vegan food just because I told them that as long as they were with me, they wouldn't eat meat, even if they didn't like it. They ate it for me. Brand didn't go to that extent, but he also followed the others. He was more like me. He didn't follow the line, he started doing it. That he wanted. He could make people follow him just because he told them to. Now, I loved Brandon, I really did. But I found myself wanting him to be like that sometimes. Do you understand? Understand, I said, taking some notes. Have you seen Terry more masculine than Brandon? She thought for a few seconds. I wouldn't say that. What would you say? I could see the thoughts swirling around in her head. Terry was more, I don't know, imposing, I think. Powerful. That attracted me. And these were the qualities you felt Brandon lacked? Yes. I took a few more notes. Okay, Kat, let's change the subject. Tell me a story. I want to hear about the first time you crossed the line with Terry. Her brow furrowed in confusion. Crossed the line? What do you mean? Do you mean sex? I chuckled to myself. I specifically used the vague expression, crossed the line, instead of the specific, cheated on my husband. Most people associate cheating with the physical act of sex. This way, they justify the little things that lead to it: flirting, sexually charged jokes, etc. It all seems innocent in comparison. The fact that she asked me to clarify meant that part of her knew that even small things could be considered inappropriate. If she didn't know this, she would immediately start talking about her first sexual encounter with Terry. I want you to tell me whatever comes to mind. Don't think too much. Whatever comes to your mind, go with it. Start talking until your inner filter turns on. She thought a little more and then said, "Okay, I guess it had to do with a bet." "Okay, great. Tell me about the bet." Katrin, 5 years ago. I leaned back in my chair and rolled my eyes as an annoying noise filled the air. "Oh, Phil," I said with a cheerful voice, cutting through the noise. "I like how you try to sound stern, like you actually mean business. It would be cute if it weren't so tiresome. But honestly, we both know you don't have anything to fall back on." He again launched into a pompous tirade about laws and regulations, none of which helped his position. He only filled the empty space with loud words that were meant to sound scary. As if on cue, the paralegal I was waiting for brought me the actual bylaws that pertained to this case, not some fictitious ones that might have applied in 1995. I pointed to the phone to show that the conversation I was having was the one I needed her for. She smiled quietly, opened the folder, and pointed to the section she had highlighted. "Kat, my client wants." Phil began to speak, his harsh voice coming from the speaker. I didn't care what his client wanted, so I interrupted him. "Phil, please stop talking. Your voice is annoying, and it makes me feel sick to my stomach when I hear too much nonsense. Obviously, your paralegals are worthless. Luckily, ours are top-notch. So I took the liberty of fulfilling your work for you." I playfully winked at the paralegal who brought me the documents as I said this. She smiled widely in recognition. "I'll email you some bylaws that might interest you. Please read them. While I love embarrassing you in court, it gets boring after how many times have you lost to me already?" The line went silent for the first time since he called me with his client's demands. He then said bitterly, "You're a real bitch, Kat." "Yes, that's right. 3 times. I could feel it boiling at the other end. "Fuck you. Okay? Fuck you." He growled, demonstrating his brilliant education at Columbia University. "Of course, Phil. Tell your wife I said hi. Bye-bye." I sang with fake joy before hanging up. Then I closed the folder and scribbled some instructions on it. "Sonia, give this to Kim and tell her to email these people. And close the door behind you, please." With a nod, Sonia took the folder and left. I exhaled loudly and leaned back in my chair, enjoying the silence. Looking at the clock, I saw that it was only 10:30 am. Brandon was probably already awake. How nice must it be to wake up whenever you want? People with real jobs don't have that luxury. I decided to take a moment and make a formal call to see how he was doing. I took out my mobile phone and found his number in my favorites list. "Hello, Kat," he said, answering after the third ring. "Hi, dear. How's your day going?" I asked automatically. I didn't listen to the answer because I knew what he would say. We had some version of this conversation every day. At this point, he will either talk about some publishing house that rejected his book, a publishing house from which he is waiting to hear back, or a new publishing house that he is going to talk to. Sometimes he changes the subject, telling me about a new story he is writing, which in turn will be rejected in the future. While I was talking to him, my office phone rang, indicating that my secretary was trying to reach me. I turned off the sound on my mobile and pressed the button to talk to her. Brandon was still mumbling, so I knew I had a few moments before I had to answer. As I said, we had this conversation every day. Yes, Kim. Mr. Ross is here to see you. I smiled to myself and rolled my eyes. Terry, of course he is here. Surely the reason for his visit was to show off and poke. I'm excited that he won our little bet. We had a client named Mr. Wellington that we both fought for. This guy was every lawyer's dream. He was a walking lawsuit and also a VIP of a Fortune 500 company. He was worth so many hours that he probably could have saved a fortune by starting his own law firm and dedicating it to his cases. You'd think his company would refuse such responsibility, but he was a master at making money. It was more profitable for them to ensure his correct presentation than to let him go. Terry and I chased this guy relentlessly. We both knew that getting him as a client would greatly increase our chances of becoming senior partners. The competition became so intense that Terry proposed a bet. The loser had to make coffee for the winner every day for a month, whenever the winner wishes. Whether it was during a board meeting or just at a meeting with a client, the loser had to endure the humiliation, stop whatever he was doing, and go get coffee. I thought I had an advantage in this fight. Since many of Mr. Wellington's cases involved inappropriate behavior with women, I strategically thought that it would be beneficial for his better image to have a female advocate. I looked good on camera, and people often responded well to me, so my involvement would help his PR. I didn't take into account that Mr. Wellington was outright sexist. His ego was so big that he didn't even feel the need to hide it. When I first met him and his wife, I wondered how she had any brain cells left after all the illegal substances she was using. Within an hour of meeting, I realized that this was the only way she could stand being married to him. I knew I was in for an uphill battle when he kept calling me baby and sweetie. He was a fat bastard, but it wasn't his sweet tooth. Terry later jokingly told me I was lucky that he didn't call me breasts like the former employee who was now suing him for sexual harassment. Long story short, Terry won the client and the bet. I hated losing, but I was glad that I wouldn't have to constantly defend this misogynist. I was a lawyer and a damn good one, but I was also a woman. Hey, Bran, I said quickly, trying to interrupt his rote monologue to get his attention. I'll call you back. A client came to see me. It was a little white lie. I shouldn't even have said it, but it seemed easier to say it was a client than another lawyer. Still, it was work-related, in a manner. Okay, cat, see you tonight. Love you. Love you too. Bye, I said hastily, turning off the phone. Then I pressed the button on the office phone again and said, let him through. A few seconds later, Terry walked in and closed the door behind him. I watched his smug grin as he sat down in front of my desk and rested his leg on his knee. How can I help you, Terry? I asked in an indifferent tone, as if he was annoying me. He laughed and rubbed his chin. Coffee, light. 2 servings of nut cream, 3 packets of Splenda. Splenda? Watching your weight? No, it's just the way Stephanie likes it. I decided to bring my secretary a cup of coffee. You know, to show my gratitude. It's the least I can do, he said with a smug smile, feigning sincerity. Your generosity knows no bounds, I said dryly, rolling my eyes and standing up. I walked to the door, preparing to leave the office. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him watching me all this time. Terry and I often divided in the office. There were a lot of caustic remarks and caustic words that we exchanged, but everyone knows that when 2 people try so hard to tease each other, it's just a thin veil for flirting. Underneath, there was mutual respect and physical attraction. I stopped at the door and turned around, ignoring his gaze at my buttocks. Are you really going to make me honor this ridiculous bet? He laughed again. You know, Kat, I hear you say that, but I'm still caffeine deficient. How about we fix that, I sighed loudly. Okay, I'll be back soon, I said through clenched teeth. When I came out, I heard him jokingly shout, Hurry up, honey. I gave him the middle finger over my shoulder in response. I seriously thought about adding something to his coffee, maybe a little Molochs or something like that. I gave up on that idea in the name of fair play, but it was close. Instead, I brought him coffee to his specifications. "Enjoy," I said mysteriously, handing him the cup. I sat down at my desk and grinned at him, challenging him to a fight. I tried to intimidate him. I didn't add anything to his coffee, but he didn't know that. He looked at me suspiciously for a moment, then took a careful sip. After making sure that the coffee was not poisoned, he looked at me again with the same devilish grin. "Let's face it, lawyer, you make great coffee. We should have made this bet a long time ago. Stephanie will love it." "Yes, kiss my ass," I said without thinking. The moment could have been awkward, but Terry played it off masterfully. "What unwomanly words. Are you kissing your husband with those lips?" he said, dodging the growing tension. I was a little disappointed that he didn't take up the challenge. Most men wouldn't miss this chance to flirt. This time I deliberately upped the ante. I leaned forward, gave him a languid look and said, "You'd be surprised what I can do with these lips." This caught his attention. He looked at me with interest, trying to understand if I was serious. When I didn't look embarrassed, he replied, "Honestly, Kat, nothing would surprise me from you. You are a woman of many talents." My ego was stroked, so I decided to cool things down. "Okay, now you can leave my office and take my perfect coffee to your secretary." The sudden change in temperature confused him for a second. Then he laughed and got up from his chair. "You can be a real bitch sometimes, you know." "I know," I said, winking and clicking my tongue as he did. He shook his head with one last laugh and headed for the door. He was ready to go out, but stopped. He turned and looked at me with a mischievous twinkle in his eyes. "What if I offered you another way to settle your bet?" Curious, I leaned back in my chair. "I'm listening." He thought for a second, as if deciding whether to say what he had in mind. Then he slyly asked, "What underwear are you wearing?" This time my jaw dropped. "Sorry about that," I exclaimed in disbelief. He took a step from the door to my desk. He looked me confidently in the eyes, repeating, "What kind of underwear are you wearing?" My lips opened. "You're kidding, right?" He didn't say anything. He didn't apologize, didn't try to win back. He just stood there as if he was seriously waiting for an answer. None of your business, that's what it is," I finally said. He grinned and laughed quietly, as if he knew something I didn't. Okay, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "But if you go to the bathroom and send me a sexy photo, I might get Stephanie to make her coffee again." Then he headed towards the door, leaving me in disbelief. "You're crazy," I said. I noticed that there was not a hint of joy or anger in my voice. It was more of a fun thing. "Just a thought," he said, finally opening the door and leaving. I sat in my now empty office and shook my head. This man had a lot of impudence. He was married, damn it. I have met Christine more than once. He also knew my husband. None of this stopped him from making an absurd proposal. Still, I couldn't help but admire his audacity. I should have been more offended, but I wasn't. Surprisingly, I was flattered. I thought Terry was attractive. Any woman would consider him such. He was handsome, ambitious, successful, always smelled good, and knew how to talk. It's nice to know that someone you find attractive also feels the same way. I considered his proposal. What should have been an immediate hell no became an argument between me and my conscience. After all, he didn't ask me to sleep with him. He didn't even ask for a nude photo. Simply sexy. I took my cell phone and sent him a quick message. "Do you have Instagram?" He responded a few minutes later with a link. I checked and saw that it was his account. "I can't believe I'm actually going to do this," I thought as I left the office and headed to the ladies' room. Dr. Carter present. Catherine sat on the sofa, looking thoughtfully into space when she finished her story. Hearing the story in her own voice seemed to unnerve her. No doubt she considered the event insignificant and hid it in the depths of her mind. It had nothing to do with the end of her marriage. It was a completely separate event. At least that's what she probably told herself until now. So, Kat, you sent him these provocative photos of yourself. I assume he enjoyed them. Her thoughtful face gave way to a confident smile. Of course, he's a man. What interests me is that you allowed yourself to become a sex object. You seem like someone who has fought long and hard not to be viewed as such. The smile left her face, and she thought for a moment. Here's the thing, Dr. Carter. I didn't see myself as a sex object for Terry. His request for pictures seemed more like an acknowledgement that he found me sexy, and he knew I felt the same way. I noted that she had finally called me Dr. Carter. By this point, her walls had almost completely collapsed. The stern, tough, cynical woman who entered the office has disappeared, at least for the moment. Her whole person changed. She allowed herself to be vulnerable with me. I understand, I said, nodding. I don't entirely agree with her, but I understand where she's coming from. And you liked this attention. Every woman wants to be desired. What about Brandon? Didn't he make you desirable? She took a deep breath and brushed her hair out of her face. It was different with Brandon. He called me beautiful and sexy all the time. So what made Terry so special? I don't know, she said with disappointment in her voice. We sat in silence, as if taking a short break. Kat stared into space, her mind searching for answers. Have you seen Brandon as your equal? Of course, she answered without hesitation. He was my husband. Being a husband does not automatically mean being an equal. You previously described Brandon as less masculine. I did not say that, she interrupted sharply. I was a little surprised by the abruptness with which she said it. It seemed inappropriate. Several times you said you wanted him to act like a man. It's just an expression, Doctor. I didn't call him less manly. She answered immediately after I finished speaking. Her tone was contentious. Well, I became a doctor again. She doesn't like the idea of undermining Brandon. Strange, considering her attitude towards him. Kat, I believe you called him a wimp. It's hard to forget such a vivid picture. That doesn't sound like a term a woman would use to describe any man, let alone one she loved and married. Yes, well, She hesitated, unable to come up with an answer. When she couldn't think of an answer, a look of defeat appeared on her face. Her eyes began to water. What did you mean by calling him those names? I asked after a short pause. I don't know, she said, and one of the tears rolled down her cheek. I think Trina was right. I did humiliate him. But I didn't try. I just wanted him to be motivated. What did you want Brandon to do? I don't know, something. Anything. He had so much potential. He was just wasting it waiting for the right person to read his novels. Do you know how disappointing and humiliating that was for me? Now we are moving somewhere. Humiliating? Yes, humiliating, she said with emotion. Here I am, a successful, tough lawyer. I was a shark at work. People respected me. My colleagues admired me. I fought every obstacle, like Rocky, damn it. Then they asked what my husband was doing. She stopped and smiled bitterly. I told them he was a writer. Then they said, "Oh, writer, what did he write?" And do you know what I had to tell them? Nothing. I finished for her, sympathy in my voice. I knew I should have let her say it herself, but I couldn't help myself. To be honest, I felt her disappointment. I was a successful therapist. I wrote several books and was highly respected. My husband owned his own successful furniture-making business. He started it in his garage with his best friend. They now had 3 offices across the state. He talked to an accountant about opening a 4th. When people asked what he did, I proudly told him about it. I like to brag about him. Most women like to brag about their husband's accomplishments. Even successful women love to brag about their men. Kat nodded sadly. Yeah, nothing. It was like he was my housewife. I know it's sexist, but I don't care. We didn't have kids, so I couldn't even use the excuse that he was a housewife. Over time, I just avoided everyone's conversations that could lead to questions about him. Trina doesn't understand this. Her husband is a bodybuilder and fitness trainer. She can only show him a photo without a shirt, and people won't care what he does. Trina? I asked. Kat looked confused for a second, so I said, "You mentioned a person named Trina twice, like I should know who that is, but—" A light bulb went on in her head. "Oh yeah, sorry, Dr. Carter. Trina is one of my best friends. We went to Stanford Law School together. She now works in the Dawes office. We both go by Catherine. People kept getting us confused, so we told everyone to call me Kat, since she was more often called Trina." Got it. Got it, I said. For some reason, the woman named Trina, who works for the district attorney, seemed familiar to me, but I couldn't figure out why. "So, all this talk about your husband's flaws makes me wonder why you married him in the first place. What attracted you to him?" A rare smile appeared on her face again. Bran was kind and thoughtful. He was the kind of person who would drive to the store at 3 a.m. for ice cream just because I couldn't sleep. "What about your sex life?" Her smile became sly. "Bran was damn good," she said with a laugh and a nod. "He was very skilled, and he was a good conversationalist." We both laughed at her joke. It was nice to see her reminiscing about the good times with her ex-husband. This kept her from placing all the blame for the breakdown of her marriage on him. "So, your problems with him stemmed from frustration with his lack of ambition. You wanted him to be successful at something just like you." "It wasn't so much about his job. I made enough to support both of us. I just wanted to be proud of him, you know. Men think their wives should be proud to be married to them, even if they don't do anything. We should admire and love them, no matter how much or how little they do." Well, yes and no. I paused to collect my thoughts. I had another way to explain it to her, and I was trying to decide the best way to put it. "Do you mind if I share my perspective on this?" "Not at all, Dr. Carter. After all, that's what I pay you for." "Touché. You work on staying attractive, right?" "Yes, I'm working." "Okay. How would you feel if your husband was embarrassed by your appearance? What if his dissatisfaction with your appearance made him ashamed to show pictures of you to people or mention you in conversation? Would it hurt you?" "Of course it would. I don't see the connection." "Well, you expect your husband to be proud that you're his wife, right? Even if you weighed 250 pounds and worked at Walmart. Wouldn't you expect him to be happy that you're his wife? You would forgive him for cheating just because you weren't beautiful enough?" "It's different, Dr. Carter. It's apples and oranges." "No, Kat, it's apples and apples. We women often subconsciously judge our potential life partners by how protective they are of us. In prehistoric times, the ability to hunt, build a house, or start a fire was what was expected of men. Now we measure this security by the importance of their career. High-paying jobs usually mean that work is more important. In today's society, women take charge of their lives and seek these jobs instead of relying on men. However, when choosing a life partner, we still looking for a man whose position is equivalent or superior to ours. We have our cake and eat it too. Intellectually, we must understand that if we are at the top of our professions, often our partner will not be there." "Okay," she said, waiting for me to connect the dots. "Well, men usually have a more primary criterion for evaluation: physical beauty. The more beautiful a wife is, the more she is respected by others. In prehistoric times, a woman's physical body determined how capable she was of giving birth and feeding children. Sexual attraction also played a role, I'm sure. Men still remained men." We both chuckled slightly before continuing. "Of course, there are other factors that play a role in choosing a life partner. Modern society has changed a lot in our perception. But if we are honest, these are the first things that men and women notice about each other." "I still don't see what you're getting at, Doctor." "Well, you could say that your dissatisfaction with your husband's lack of ambition is almost equivalent to his dissatisfaction with your appearance." She looked at me thoughtfully. Then her face distorted. "No, no offense, Dr. Carter, but I completely disagree with you on this." okay? Let's agree to disagree. Regardless, your dissatisfaction with your husband led to your infidelity. Regardless of how you look at it, you dealt a big blow to your marriage, a blow from which you could not recover. But no, Kat, you did it. Not him. You. I made it, she said quietly, and tears began to flow. I made it. She laid her head on her knees and cried loudly. Her shoulders shook with sobs. I sat silently, letting my emotions take over her. She needed it. Despite the pain, it was necessary. I didn't want to hurt him, Dr. Carter. I really didn't. I just became so disappointed in him that I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. But I never wanted to hurt him. I know, Kat, I said comfortingly, handing her a napkin. But you have to admit that you hurt him. You have to accept it. It's easy to blame everything on him and call him a wuss. When you do that, you justify your actions by saying that he deserved it. But no matter what, you can't make him responsible for your choices. You made the choice to cheat on him and move away from him. You may have started out trying to motivate him, but at some point you gave up. I don't want to, Dr. Carter. I don't want to be that person. I felt it was time to get her talking again. I didn't want it to become a teacher-student activity where she obediently listens to me talk. She seemed to have a hard time with this conversation. Tell me, Kat, how did your crush on Terry affect your home life? How did it all escalate? Kat sobbed and took a deep breath. Well, Catherine, my life changed slowly, and then bam, nothing was the same. In the office, I expected things to be awkward between Terry and me. Surprisingly, everything was not like that. There was some self-awareness in the beginning. It wasn't so much the photo I sent him after all. He only saw my underwear. The thing was, I didn't know what he was thinking. What was he waiting for? I was passionate about him, but I didn't want to cheat. But when I saw him, he acted as if nothing had happened. There were no awkward attempts to start a conversation. He was just teasing me like always. I did the same, and everything continued as before. This does not mean that there was no spark. We still flirted when no one was looking. At meetings, I would catch his gaze lingering on me. Then he smiled a knowing smile when he saw that I had noticed him. To compensate for this, our competition has increased. I didn't hesitate to poach his clients when the opportunity arose. I would even try to take Mr. Wellington away from him if I could. We were still competing for the position of senior partner. However, underneath it all, our primal desires were hidden. We waited. I loved having his eyes scan my body from head to toe at every opportunity. I pretended not to notice, just as he pretended not to catch me sneaking a whiff of his cologne. But we didn't take the next step. First of all, I was still somewhat happily married. Mostly. Brandon was an unmotivated dreamer who wasted his potential by waiting for someone to read his novels, but he was still my favorite. I wasn't sure Terry was as reserved as I was. He and his secretary seemed to be, shall we say, too comfortable with each other. They tried to appear professional when others were around, but something about their interactions suggested gossip, a certain familiarity that seemed somewhat less than professionally appropriate. Believe it or not, office romances were common in our office. No one would blink an eye, even if the people were married. We spent more time in the office than at home. Spouses do not understand the stress and workload that lawyers have to deal with. Late nights, morning meetings, fast pace. All this leaves an imprint. Spouses can often unwittingly add to this stress. They complain about you not being home and how lonely they feel. They do this by spending your money and driving luxury cars that you paid for, of course. The only people who understand are people with similar professions. So it's natural to seek solace in the office where we all get it. Another reason I think Terry and I didn't give in to our desires was the competition that existed between us. Both wanted to have an advantage over each other, so neither took the next step. I certainly wasn't going to chase him. How desperate would it seem for a married woman to pursue another man, especially when he had nothing to offer her that she couldn't do for herself? Say what you want, but society places different stigmas on men and women who cheat. A married man chasing a woman is an untrustworthy dog, but a married woman stalking a man is desperate and needy and an untrustworthy bitch. I was neither one nor the other. So I suppressed my illicit desire and settled for flirting from a distance. Terry seemed pleased with the same thing, and this went on for about a year. At this stage, I was working late almost every night. I was getting more and more irritated with Brandon. No matter what I said or did, he wouldn't get up and do what he needed to do. He was so smug that it infuriated me. It got to the point where I no longer wanted him sexually and didn't want to be around him. What was annoying was that he thought he was doing everything he could to get his books published, so he didn't see the logic. My thought process was either he's lazy and doesn't do his best, or his books really aren't that good and no amount of fuss is going to make his dream come true. In any case, I thought he needed to do something else, maybe write on the side. But he was committed to this fantasy, so he put all his work in one basket, and that turned me off. We still had sex, but not as often as before. And to be honest, it no longer brought such satisfaction. Being angry with Brandon made him less physically attractive to me. Do you know what I mean? That is, there was nothing different with his body. He did everything the same as always, but something was missing, at least for me. One night, during one of my many late evenings, I was feeling very anxious. Brandon's situation didn't stop my body's natural desires. All this only made me sexually unsatisfied. I used to suppress it, but it never went away. It was just smoldering. That night, it didn't just smolder, it was boiling. And then there was a knock on my office door. "Come in," I shouted, remembering that my assistant had already gone home. The door opened and Terry entered. "I thought I saw your car in the parking lot," he said. "Do you ever go home?" "Well, there should be at least one lawyer here to pick up your mistakes. The only time I see you working is when you pretend to be a lawyer to poach my clients." He chuckled. "Just because I make it look easy doesn't mean I'm not working. I just get it right the first time and don't have to stick around to correct mistakes." "No, you're staying to have sex with your secretary." He gave me an amused look that said, "Awa, good one," then sat down in the chair opposite my desk. "Well, she's not here right now, but I'm here." "Why?" The playfulness in his voice disappeared. Something else appeared there, something seductive. His eyes were full of lust. He openly scanned my body through my pencil skirt and blouse. They stopped when his eyes fell on my breasts. My hips began to tremble. My stomach was growling with excitement. I tried to suppress the desire that was growing inside me. I honestly tried. But it's been months since Brandon and I made love. My body was on fire now. I had to run away from here. I had to go home. I should have thrown Brandon on the bed and had sex with him. But I didn't. Instead, I walked around my desk and sat down in front of Terry. I did it slowly, first sitting on the edge, then placing my foot on the chair between his legs and, using the chair as support, pushing myself back. Then I sensuously crossed my legs and leaned forward. "I don't know, Terry. Why are you still here?" He didn't respond with words. Instead, he stood up and stepped forward until we were inches apart. I smelled his cologne. My breathing quickened, as did my heartbeat. Nothing was said. Silence was pregnant with lust. We just sat there, breathing each other in. I didn't even notice that my eyes were closed until I felt his finger lift my chin. Then he kissed me. "Stop, cat, stop," my conscience begged. But it was a whisper compared to my body, which was screaming at the top of its voice. We had sex. As cliché as it may sound, I didn't feel guilty until I was driving home. I took a shower in the office and cleaned myself up. The bathrooms in the executive office had showers, so when I left, no one would have guessed. Makeup was applied, hair was styled, clothes were neat. I didn't look like a woman who had sex an hour ago. I just felt wrong. Everything was different now. In that 20-minute sex session, my perception of my entire marriage changed dramatically. I wanted to get a divorce. I loved Brandon. I really loved him. But I couldn't be married to him anymore. Being his wife sucked more out of my life than it added. This evening was the final nail in the coffin. The fact that I was intimate with another man was proof that I did not want to be in this marriage. When I returned home, I found him in the living room. He was sitting on the sofa with a laptop on his lap. There was a documentary on the TV about the fall of the Roman Empire. "Hello, kitty cat," he said when he saw me. "There's some Chinese food left in the fridge if you're hungry. I bought you General Tso's chicken and lo mein." I walked past him and sat on the couch instead of the sofa. When he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. "What happened, cat?" he asked, a look of worry appearing in the creases of his forehead. I took a deep breath and a single tear rolled down my face. "Bran, we need to talk." Dr. Carter present. "Wow, you told him everything? Just like that?" I asked, genuinely surprised. "Just like that," she repeated. "I even told him about the photos I sent Terry." "Wow," was all I could say. Most people usually only confess when forced. They usually wait until they are caught or are about to be caught. And how did he react? Angry, furious, screaming, swearing, calling me every name he could think of. It's funny, it was the first time he really showed that side of him. "And you? What do you think I did?" I screamed back, of course. I called him a who? "A rag and a slob," she said quickly. "Did you say that? To your face?" I asked, not believing. She nodded sadly. "Wow, I don't know what to say. You never cease to amaze me, cat," I said, combining admiration and bewilderment. "I know, I'm a bitch. You can say it." I wasn't going to say that, but Brandon could definitely make a case for it. I joked. This made her half smile. "Oh, he definitely made that point." Very loudly, my ears are still ringing. "So where does this leave us? What happened next?" Cat 3 years ago. The room looked so familiar that I had to remind myself that I wasn't here for work. I'm here to file a divorce. For several months after my confession, Brandon and I lived like two ghosts. We were physically in the same house, but couldn't really see or touch each other. I would come home from work, and the only sign of him would be the empty food containers in the trash. We could honestly not see each other for a week. We never talked about sleeping quarters, so I took the lead and moved into the guest bedroom. I thought it was right since I was the one who cheated. He didn't mind. In fact, he barely said a word. The next time we actually talked face to face was when Mike, my lawyer, gave me divorce papers to give to Brandon. I could have asked him to deliver the papers while I was at work, but I felt that I had to deliver them in person. So I finished my workday early and went home. I wanted to catch Brandon off guard. I had a suspicion that he ran to the bedroom to hide when he sensed that I would soon be home to avoid meeting him. I returned home 4 hours earlier than usual. I found him again in the living room. He didn't have time to disappear. Again, like déjà vu, I sat down on the couch. I threw the papers on the coffee table in front of me. "Is this what I think it is?" he asked without raising his eyes from the screen. All I could say was a hoarse yes. He tried to look neutral and impenetrable, but I noticed an immediate expression of pain on his face. Then, without saying a word, he lifted the envelope, pulled out the papers, and read them silently. It was getting a little awkward sitting there while he read, so I started to get up to leave him alone with it. Before I got to the door, he said, "No, take them back." "What?" I asked. "Take them back. I won't sign this," he said again, placing the papers back on the coffee table. I'm speechless. I didn't know what kind of reaction I was expecting, but I didn't expect this. This offer was more than fair. He kept the BMW, which was fully paid for. He stayed on my health insurance until he got his. I even offered him alimony. Lots of alimony. Enough so that he can pursue his ridiculous dream and still live a relatively prosperous life. What more could he want? What do all hurt spouses want? It's never about money. It usually involves making someone else suffer. I didn't want to fight him in court. I really didn't want to. Not because I was afraid to lose. Quite the opposite. I knew I would win and destroy him in the process. Bran, please, don't make this any more painful than it needs to be. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry for that. But trust me, you don't want to go to court. That's why I'm offering you so much alimony. If you go to court, the judge will give you much less. For the first time, he turned and looked at me. His eyes were filled with anger and tears. There was hatred behind them. You think it's about money? He said contemptuously. No, this is not about your money. I'm not signing this because I want you to draw a new document. I don't want anything from you in this document. What? I don't want anything from you. No child support, no car, no insurance, nothing. He said with disgust in his voice. I want to pretend that you never came into my life. I want it to be like I never met you. But how will you live? Not your problem. You've already written me down as a useless husband who needs to be supported. Damn it, I won't be that ex-husband who sucks your baby tooth. Change the document, then I'll sign. After that, I promise that you will never have affairs with my person. Bran, think about what you're saying. I begged him. Most people would have run away before he changed his mind. But I couldn't. After everything we'd been through, I didn't want him to starve because of his wounded pride. Catherine, get out of my face, he said indifferently, returning his attention to the computer in front of him. All I could do was take the documents and go to my room. Now we are here to formalize everything. No matter how much his lawyer pleaded with Brandon, he didn't give up. I tried to make him see logic several times, but each time I was met with poisonous anger. In the end, I gave up. So be it. If he didn't want my money, I wasn't going to keep begging him to take it. I signed my part of the documents. Then my lawyer slid the papers across the table to his side. Brandon and his lawyer whispered for a few seconds, then the lawyer nodded and gave Bran a pen. Bran went to sign, but something made him stop. His pen hovered over the paper as if in indecision. Then he looked at me. When our eyes met, I saw the man I fell in love with many years ago, the man with whom I thought of growing old. I loved you, Kat. I really did, he said sadly. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I looked at him. His eyes also began to fog up. We sat there with a chasm of regrets between us. Then, with a sad shake of his head, he quickly signed his name in the correct places. Without saying a word, he stood up and quickly left the room. Dr. Carter present. Kat cried, unable to control her emotions by the end of her story. It was difficult for me to remain detached. I felt Kat's pain as she relived the regret of that time in her life. I even felt Brandon's pain, even though he wasn't here to tell his side of the story. I couldn't imagine the despair of being rejected by a spouse who feels like you're not good enough. How long have you been divorced? I asked. She sobbed and wiped her nose with another napkin that I gave her during her story. 3 years. That seems like a long time. Is this the first time you've mourned the end of your marriage? Not really. After everything was finalized, I took 2 weeks off. I went on a cruise to the Bahamas to get away from home. Even with Brandon's things gone, there were still bits of him everywhere. His body wash was still there, was in the bedroom bathroom. The pillows still smelled of his lotion. The food he loved was still in the refrigerator. I wasn't able to completely empty his house, so I left and paid the maid extra to do it while I was gone. Was the cruise fun? Sometimes. I drank a lot. I slept with some guy a couple of times with a nice smile and a hard 6-pack. He was at least 6 or 7 years younger than me. He was a good distraction, I admit it. He had a lot of stamina. I also went to a few clubs, ate exotic foods in restaurants, and bought a lot of things that I didn't really need. But when I returned to my cabin, all I could think about was my marriage. How were you when you returned to work? She laughed loudly. While I was gone, it was announced that Terry had become the new senior partner. So I returned to this pleasant surprise. Ironic, isn't it? Indeed, it should have been a blow, considering everything that's happened. She sobbed angrily. Yes, it really is. That's why I quit. What? Did you quit? I asked, not hiding the surprise in my voice. She laughed again. Yes, quit. Maybe I was still grieving over my marriage and wasn't thinking clearly. I don't know. I was very emotional. But when I heard the news, I just lost my cool, Jerry Maguire style. I caused quite a stir when I left. They're probably still talking about it. Wow. That's all I could say. I didn't expect this turn in history. Are you sorry about this? About what? Leaving your job or divorcing Brandon? About everything. She thought about it for a second before saying, "Yes, I'm sorry." So what brings you here after all this time? I would have expected it to happen sooner. She reached into her purse, which she placed next to her on the sofa, and pulled out a wrinkled, worn piece of paper that looked like a booklet. She placed it on the coffee table between us. I took it and read it. It was a program for a play called The Woman in the Cave. "What is this?" I asked. She took it from my hand, turned it over, and pointed to the name. She pointed to the author's name. It was Brandon's play. She sat back and told me about it. It's a story about a man who gets into a cave during a storm. He's in there with a woman. While the storm rages outside, he tells her stories about his life. Unfortunately, she's a real bitch. She constantly tells him what's wrong with every one of his stories, calls him weak and pathetic, and criticizes him at every opportunity. At first, he gets angry at her, and they shout and argue. Then he begins to believe that he is useless. There is potential. Realizes that this woman's goal is only to humiliate him. When he finally confronts her and says that he will no longer trust her, she disappears and the storm ends. Wow. This is the only thing I could say like a billion times today. The play runs for a week. Then he takes it to another city. Most critics give this play rave reviews. There are even rumors that he has another one ready to be released. While reading the program, I looked at where the performance was being held. You realize it's a 2-hour drive, right? Yes, I know. I see. I'm guessing you were already there to watch it. She nodded. How many times? 3. Every time I cry. Really? Why? She wiped the moisture from her cheeks. I don't know. I think I hate thinking about what I did to him. When I watch the woman in the cave break the main character at every turn, I just shudder. If this is how Brandon sees me, then I have to be a real monster. Do you see him there? Every time. And you never come up to him to talk? No, I hide and just look at him after the performance. I tell myself that I will come and talk to him. I say this every time, but then I lose my resolve. What would you say to him if you had the courage? I don't know. I'm sorry, I guess. If the woman in this play is me, then I would be terrible living with him. I want him to know that I never meant to humiliate him. I was angry and disappointed in him, but I loved him. At least until the end. I just wanted him to do something with his life. But my intention was never to devalue him. Do you still consider him as you called him a doormat? No, my husband was a wimp. My ex-husband was not. Now I understand why he didn't want anything from me in the divorce. He didn't try to prove to me that he could cope without me. He forged his own path, created his own path. I wish I was there to help him instead of holding him back. Maybe you helped him. What? Maybe being with you kept him going. He didn't have the desperation that drives artists. Many great works of art and literature emerge during periods of emotional turmoil. Look at all the great works created during the Holocaust, slavery, or the Great Depression. Living in your house, eating your food, he didn't have that desperation to ignite the spark. Perhaps the end of your marriage gave him what he needed to find himself. But I'm a cave girl. Maybe, I agreed. But the girl from the cave helped the man find himself, didn't she? She looked at me with a surprised face. So what are you saying? Are you saying he should thank me? No, Kat, absolutely not. But I think you should try to talk to him and say whatever needs to be said, and then you should forgive yourself. I stopped to watch her. She sobbed into tissues, remnants from her previous crying spells. I continued. That's why you're really here, isn't it? Because you haven't forgiven yourself. All this anger you feel towards him for being a doormat is just you shifting the real blame. He was never a doormat. He was just unmotivated. You're angry because you weren't the one who finally motivated him, only after you broke his heart. Yes, she said in a broken voice, bursting into tears again. I was his wife. We should have celebrated this together. Well then, I guess you know what to do when you see this play for the fourth time. It seems like you have a lot to tell him. But what if he doesn't want to see me? What if he rejects me? Considering the fact that you've been rejecting him for almost a year, I think you can handle a little karma. A big, mean lawyer like you. She gave a tearful laugh. You're probably right, Dr. Carter. We both stood up, and I let her hug me. You'll be okay, Kat. I whispered in her ear, calming her by stroking her back. Thank you, Beth. Thank you so much. Kat, next night. For the fourth time that week, I listened to the loud, standing ovation the actors received. For the fourth time, the actors called my ex-husband onto the stage to take a bow with them. And for the fourth time, I cried. After everything calmed down and people began to go home, I stood in the corner and watched him interact with the guests from the audience. Every part of my being wanted to turn and run back to the car. But my heart needed to stay. I needed to talk to him. When the crowd began to thin out, I approached him. He noticed me when I was a few steps away from him, and his smile faded. His eyes tried to understand what they were seeing. Hey, Bran, I said quietly. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. It just happened that way. Kat, hello, didn't expect to see you. Yeah, well, I was in town, so I decided to see your play. Heard a lot of good things about it. Surprised, he asked. Really? Have you been to the city? Here? My brain was desperately trying to come up with a plausible scenario that would explain my being so far from home. When nothing came to mind, I decided to humbly tell the truth. Actually, no, I'm lying. The only reason I'm here is to see you, just like yesterday and the day before. He froze in place. Are you here to see me? He asked in disbelief. For what? I took a deep breath. This conversation went better than I expected. I didn't expect to get this far. Various scenarios were running through my head. One of them even ended with him roughly grabbing me and throwing me out. I need to say something. I'm sorry. That's all I could say. He nodded and looked away. There was silence. None of us knew where to take this conversation. There were so many unsaid words between us, so much unexpressed pain. It was impossible to know where to start. You hurt me, Kat, he finally said. Just. That four-word statement summed up everything we were trying to say to each other. I know. I look back on it all, and I said, unable to stop the tears that began to flow. Bran looked at me and nodded. Yes, me too. Silence reigned again. Once again, Brandon took the lead. What do you think of my play? He asked, changing the mood that threatened to become overwhelming. My face lit up. Oh God, I love her. Honestly, I didn't know you were capable of this. I didn't mean for it to sound the way it did. It was meant to be a compliment, but instead, it sounded as if I had no faith in him at all. What I wanted to say is that I didn't know you wrote plays. I thought you only wrote novels. I said, quickly trying to correct the situation. I sat there, hoping he would accept it instead of focusing on my mistake. Well, a wise man once told me that if I'm doing my best and still getting rejected by publishers, then maybe I should try something else. There was a note of humor in his voice. He even smiled. I sighed with relief. Well, this wise man sounds smart. Probably went to Stanford. I joked. Then sadness washed over me as I added, even if she was a bitch. We sat in uncomfortable silence again. He wasn't going to deny that I was a bitch, and I didn't expect that, but still secretly hoped that he would do it. Bran, am I the girl from the cave? I asked after the silence became strange. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to confirm it, but I needed to know. He nodded. Yes. Well, partly. When I started writing the play, it was you. But when I finished, I had a kind of epiphany. I realized that a lot of what you were saying was what I thought about myself. That yes, I didn't think I was a pushover, but I was unmotivated. I shuddered internally when he said that last thing, but he didn't notice. He just kept talking. I was content to sit and wait for someone to knock on my door and offer me a golden opportunity. It was only after our divorce that I was able to see this, after going through all the rage, of course. It was as if I was surrounded by you and your things and couldn't see myself. Do you understand? I nodded. Yes, I understand. My biggest regret is that I didn't find a way to motivate you without being such a bitch. I just saw so much potential in you. I thought you were wasting it, and it made me resentful. Then something happened. The situation with Terry. Anger showed on his face. Yeah, I could definitely do without it. I know. You didn't deserve this. I wish I could come back and make things right. He didn't answer, and there was silence again. I fought with my thoughts to get us out of this swamp of the topic. I didn't want to reopen old wounds. So who is that girl you were talking to? Is there a new Mrs. Kerrigan in the young, beautiful playwright's life? I asked, trying to diffuse the situation. No, not yet, but soon, he said with a boyish smile. Soon? I asked. He nodded. Yes, her name is Peyton. I met her at a local coffee shop. She is also a poetry salon. I found this place by chance one day and have been going there ever since. It became my sanctuary. Listening to people express themselves through writing helped me when I was at the bottom. I'm so sorry, Bran, I said again, probably for the billionth time. The feeling of guilt came over me again. He waved his hand as if it didn't matter. It's all in the past. Besides, that's how I met Payday. Drink Day? I asked incredulously. He laughed. You call her Payday? You're kidding, right? He shook his head and took a sip from his glass. I covered my eyes with my hand as if I was embarrassed and asked, What's with you and those clumsy nicknames? His mouth opened as if he was feigning offense. Come on, don't pretend you didn't like Kitty Cat. I grimaced as if I felt something unpleasant and shook my head. This caused another wave of laughter from him. You're a liar. We started to attract attention from people at other tables, so we calmed down. When we were able to act like adults again, he said, Payday is the one who suggested I write plays. Is it true? He took another sip of his soda and continued. Yes, when I finally showed her all my books, she wasn't very complimentary. Brutally honest, to be precise, with emphasis on brutal. Well, we both know how much you love brutally honest women. I joked. Maybe I'm a masochist, he said with a laugh. But she gave me good comments. She said the reason they weren't good was because there was too much dialogue and not enough context. The format was better suited for actors and actresses. That turned on a light bulb in my head. And 6 months later, I had my first play. Woman in the Cave. Hell no. My first play was terrible. Peyton said so, with a frankness almost equal to what did you call me? A wimp and a weakling. The embarrassed, apologetic expression returned to my face. But along with her criticism, she gave a lot of good comments and encouragement. About a year after that, I had this play. She read it, thought it was brilliant, and helped me direct it. She even became a director. Now people everywhere are clamoring for it. Wow, that's great, Bran, I said with admiration. To be honest, I felt a little jealous hearing how she helped him achieve his dream in a way that I couldn't. She truly motivated him, believing in him to the point that she made it her mission to help him succeed. She didn't just point out the mistakes in his dream, she showed how to fix them. When I came here, I didn't know what to expect from our conversation. Part of me hoped he wasn't dating anyone. I was a little disappointed to learn this. But it also took a huge weight off my shoulders. It was nice to see him happy. There was something in him now that was not there when we were married, the confidence of a man who knows he is doing what he is good at. He was the Brandon I knew he could be. Peyton sounds wonderful, I said, squeezing his hand on the table. Thank you, Kat. It means a lot. When I finally let go of his hand, he asked, "What about you? How are you doing? Anyone special?" I shook my head. No, no one in particular, but I left the company. What? Why? It's a long story. The short version is that I was passed over for a senior partner. He shook his head. Damn, Kat, I know how much you wanted this. Well, in my opinion, they lost a lot. He said. I honestly believed that he was sincere. Yes, well, it happens, you know. But I quickly found a job at another company. They cut my salary a little, but it was barely noticeable because my ex-husband was a stubborn asshole who refused child support. Please, he joked arrogantly. Be that as it may, anyway, I'm focused on my career right now. There's a lot more room for growth in the new firm, and I'm determined to succeed. That leaves little room for relationships. If Mr. Right comes along, fine. If he will be happy to sit in the back seat of my goals, we can try. But I'm not looking good where I am now, I said with a smile. He nodded and gave me a look that told me he was really happy for me. Great. We talked for another couple of hours. We discussed everything. He told stories about new people in his life. I told him about a few things I was working on. As I already said, he was a very good conversationalist. I was disappointed when it ended. I didn't want to leave him. If I was honest with myself, there was a big part of me that missed him and what he brought to my life. Me and this Brandon guy could do a much better job, but he was happy in the new life he found. It suited him, and I was happy for him. When I drove home, I felt better than I had in a long time. I knew Brandon had forgiven me, which really helped me forgive myself. I may have been his cave girl, but that's not the end for either of us. A person who lives life to the fullest learns from the past, lives in the present, and plans for the future. What more could you ask for? Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.